session, and we have Professor Helsley from Fusion Power Associate on readiness of heavy ion fusion using single pass RF driver.
As was the case earlier this week, I'm really speaking for Bob Burke. At least this time I'm a co-author in the paper, but last time it was not my subject really. I'd like to talk to you this morning briefly about the readiness of HIF. And we think that the RF driver has been looked at for literally decades now, and it should be ready to be considered in a very real way. The last talk closed with this pellet diagram, and you will notice that there's a little addition to the bottom of the slide here. Oops. The patent was actually issued this week, 2 days ago. And we have, I can discuss this a bit more later. But basically, the issue is that the pellet is recently understood. The driver pulse has to be large. The deposition is classical physics. The placement of the pellet in the beam has at least been resolved to our satisfaction. The timing profile looks reasonable, and fast ignition is feasible with an RF driver of the sort we're talking about. RF drivers are mainstream accelerator technology. The configuration is known. The enlarged phase space of multiple isotopes is very beneficial. The big ignition pulse can get there. I don't know what that O is doing there. That's a translation problem. And fast ignition is there. And I would encourage you once again to look up Remes and Meyer-Terrain's article on the thermonuclear burn propagation in a pre-compressed cylindrical DT target. Very interesting article, and you can find it with that little bit of search that I put on the slide. Bob wants to point out that we know that fusion works out here. We proved that in 1952. There's a whole set of classified experiments that took place in this region, and the confidence is very high that the driver energy can be met. We attempted to get a driver energy using NIF. We didn't make it. Whoops, here it goes again. And we didn't get quite high enough. Our confidence is not large. So really, one has to target an energy in this range, and our target is 20. Bob points out that it's all about ignition. It has to be able to be repeated and repeated and repeated. It has to be reliable. It has to be economical. I'll talk a bit more about that on Friday. The rest of the story is that the chamber has to be survived for more than 30 years. You have to have a source of fuel, and the big C item is that it has to be profitable or nobody's going to invest. Nobody's interested. So you have to be able to show that whatever you're doing can be profitable. Unfortunately, it's always costly with RF accelerators, but the return is very high relative to that. So it probably is profitable and interesting. I'll talk about that tomorrow. Bob points out that it's ready, aim, fire, and repeat is what you have to think about. The pellet has to be protected The pellet has to be tracked. There can be no solid lens. You basically have to have an open vacuum all the way to the pellet. The beam has to be transported to the pellet. The chamber has to be protected. The working fluid has to be hot, and you have to have a means of recovering vacuum within the chamber within a second if you're going to operate a system. And the question is, what does readiness mean? Your ideas and your thoughts on that are important. Is readiness when ITER achieves the Lawson criteria? Is it when NIF ignites the pellet? Or is it something else? Is it the technology is ready to be constructed and delivered? It has to be readiness on many sides. And I guess Bob wants me to point out that there's a security issue here. We're dealing with a pellet that in the U.S., to make it large enough to be viable, is classified. We can't get the U.S. government to become involved. The national labs cannot be involved in the pellet calculations, or they can't tell us what the answer is. So we've had to go outside. And the real issue is fusion, the way we're defining it, is a wicked problem. Wicked problems are those that don't have ready solutions, and every step brings up another question relative to the next step. And we seem to have caught ourselves in that loop for the last 40 years. It's just perpetual motion machine, if you wish. The environment sees nothing to support. The technical involvement depends on government. Government says it's a weapon. Industry follows government, says, oh, we can't use it. Finance sees no opportunity. There's no funding for progress, and you're back to where you start. And that's the game. That has been the story for 40 years in heavy ion fusion. That you're in this loop, you can't get out of it. You have to decide how to get out of that loop. And as far as we're concerned, we run into this problem. 29 across is classified. All the answers are classified. We've tried to get clearance. We spent 4 years trying to get clearance to do a pellet calculation. We can't get there. It gets as far as some bureaucrat's desk in Washington, D.C., and nobody goes beyond that point. Burton Risker addressed this. Martin Tickley addressed this in their publications. That we run into a classification problem. Fortunately, I don't have clearance anymore. I can talk about what I want. Well, we're in laser fusion syndrome, if you wish. Fusion explosions do work. We know that. Lasers weren't the right source. As Bob often points out, RF accelerators are brand X laser. You have enough energy to do the job. Why don't we use it? There are very interesting physics in NIF, however. Plasma physics is interesting stuff. We've heard that here. We love this comment. You see, to demonstrate high yield on a platform, it's a 2028 objective. This is the statement made in, 2015. Here's the same document made in 2016, no substantive changes relative to 2015, so it says. But wait a minute, the milestone disappeared. There is no milestone anymore. There is no completion to the project. And yet, funding for HIF side is dependent upon that ignition taking place. At least what the government tells us. So Bob's message is never, never give up. And you know the Charlie Brown cartoon. HIF has to have big pulses, focusing, efficient coupling, rep rate, efficiency, reliability, durability, no interface problem, no chamber problem. The latent readiness is always there, but the driver also has some uh-ohs. The ring storage was the storage ring was a problem in the early drivers. The induction linac doesn't maintain the focus of the beam. And John Lawson brought this to your attention in 1987, published in 1988, I believe, that says our understanding of accelerators, targets, and reactors is now too great for transformative new inventions or ideas to happen. Wow, what a statement. We've heard many presentations at this meeting that says there are new ideas out there that have been there. But we've been hiding behind the fact that, wait a minute, Lawson said it wasn't possible. We think that's a mistake, of course. Never say never. Many new ideas have come along. Since Lawson's article, new ideas relative to cylindrical pellets rather than whole rounds have come out. They've been calculated and published. There are new and bigger driver pulses. There's fast ignition. You can dispense with the storage rings if you're willing to put a big enough front end on your machine. And we know a lot more. We have a lot better computer capabilities now than when Lawson wrote his article. We've come a long way in the last 20 years, but we haven't gotten to the point we're ready to say, do it. The path that has been followed is this one, and we think that, I keep reporting, some of the things are right here. And if you haven't read all this stuff recently, you ought to review it. It's very interesting. There's synergy in the use of multiple isotopes or microbunches. You can maintain your beam quality almost to the target. You have to let it go at the very end, but you can maintain it almost all the way to the target. You get a very small spot size, as I pointed out earlier, 50 microns on target. But the readiness has to be international. There has to be somebody telling our governments that we're ready to go, that really we do know enough of the science. We've tried with the U.S. government for a decade, most of a decade now. They don't want to talk to us. As I pointed out yesterday, there's a developing partnership that's available because of the sanctions lifting we're able to do on Iran. Iran wants technology in accelerators and in fusion. We think that's an opportunity for this organization to come together and give a common plan that says, let's go forward along these lines. It was a particularly interesting agreement because it dealt with nuclear weapons, that we had agreements on the table that basically allowed a conclusion between governments that don't see eye to eye. In keeping with, or not making the mistake that a political candidate made, I'm going to quote from John Kennedy. It means a degree of dedication, organization, and discipline which have not always characterized our research and development efforts. We're all independents. We see ours as being most important, but we need to have a degree of standardization and agreement that we're proceeding on this line with this conclusion in mind. And I'm preaching to a choir that I don't know very well, but Bob's message is the Chinese have a statement, which I can't pronounce, And I think it means bring core things together and make something new. HIF does exactly that. It brings core things together, non-technical core things as well, political core things, energy, environment, security. Eventually, it has to go to industry. Industry has to be assured there's not too much risk. And the question is, where do we put the environment, the environmental movement in our planning? They seem to have sort of left this field. We're not on their agenda. We're not a renewable. We're a big power producer, which is exactly what society needs, but we're not on their agenda. They exited, if you wish. HIF has had latent readiness from the start. When it was proposed in the 1970s, 200 scientists basically got behind it and said, let's do it. It got proposed to governments to build it. The government that was proposed to declined it because it was in a weapons program element, and it clearly wasn't a weapon. They did not decline HIF because it wasn't wise to do it. They declined it because the wrong agency, the wrong arm of an agency was proposing it. And oops, I lost some key words. Color's not right. What's important here is to bring the core things together. Our core understanding of accelerators, our core understanding of plasma physics, our core understanding of classical physics even, energy deposition in the target. And the movement has to start in this auditorium. You are the people that have to start this movement. You have to say, we have a way to go, we know where we want to go, and here are 1, 2, 3 ways of achieving it. We get behind this for this reason, or behind that for that reason. And I think that I probably said enough now, so I'm going to end right there, and I'll take a few questions. And I don't mean to be preaching to a choir, but because I'm not the person that should be preaching. Bob should be. He's been in this game since the beginning, and he really wants to see it end.
Thank you very much.
I'll try to answer questions to the extent that I know what my answer will be.
So, Joe?
I have one question and one comment. First, let's start with the question. Actually, let's start with the comment, and then I ask a question, and then I'm done. The comment is actually, personally, I like the cylindrical target myself. I like that idea because it's more friendly to accelerator, the configuration, because otherwise if you have shining the target from all kinds of directions, it's very hard to bend high energy beam, especially heavy iron high energy beam. So geometry wise, I like it very much. And Enrique, as you know, Enrique, who that is, Hernestrosa from Berkeley previously, has been working on the X target, which is a cylindrical target. But I want to say one thing, and I also don't have classification issue, so I can say that every time when you bring up cylindrical target, you hit a brick wall, and there's some reason behind that. So that's a comment. I mean, you hit a brick wall from some people who has classification currency issue, and they don't want to talk to you about cylindrical target. So number two is in my question, what does it mean that you have a patent on this thing? I mean, does it mean that everybody else don't bother to work on it because you own it now? So explain and educate us about it.
Related to research, the patent only has validity in that Bob proposed a specific methodology to build a system and that patent was granted. The issue is not that we're trying to keep it from the research area, that if it ever does get built, Bob wanted to make sure it was patented, and that patent has been granted. It took 8 years.
I guess the question is, the patent is about the configuration that you had, not so much as about RF accelerator or some, you know,
It's
using
all-
that for heavy ion fusion, right?
It's only about the specific means of getting enough energy to the target. That's what the patent basically looks at, a specific configuration of an accelerator that gets energy to the target and it enables ignition.
Okay, thank you very much for a very enthusiastic talk. So I mean, to claim the readiness to funding agency, for example, I think we should collect some, for example, end-to-end simulation or some experimental data for some proof of principle test of some equipment. So you showed a lot of very nice work, but without any simulations or the collection of experimental data. So
That's because I'm not the right person.
okay.
I couldn't defend it if I tried, but it was defended at the IF conference in 2011, and it was in the report of the IF conference. It says this is the way we should be going, that enough energy is delivered. It is, all the accelerator physics is known. You can get enough energy to the target. That was defended before an audience much bigger than this one, and found meritorious. Unfortunately, Bob is not a publisher, and I'm not very good at that either. I don't publish things well, even though I have a few hundred publications. It's because I have a lot of grad students. And my grad students are not in this area. So it's part of the reason we're still talking about this configuration, because we haven't managed to get across to this community that there is a solution that we feel is very, very appropriate, that has been vetted by the accelerator community, and IF, by the way, was advanced high energy fusion accelerators.
Well, but now you have a patent already granted, so maybe previously you can't publish it, but now you may be able to just
Okay.
basically.
I want each of you to encourage Bob to publish it.
Yeah, I mean, the patent release.
You can go read the patent. It's published on Google. You can get it. You can get a copy of the patent.
The other Bob has something to say to us.
Let's see, from the classifications point of view, that's a gorilla you're going to run up against, unless you're in a handful of nations, and there's just no getting around that. That aside, that can be entertaining. The issue, the bigger gorilla in the room, I don't think is the driver. So everything, there are 2 or 3 or 4 different kinds of drivers we're talking about here. They all seem to me, based on my naivete, to have a certain amount of validity. The big thing you're going to run into is what the hell happens when the ions hit this target. It's the target physics that is a complete unknown here. You can't cartoon that. And NIF ended up proving that things are harder than what a lot of smart people thought.
I encourage you to read Meyer-Turbain, Ramus and Meyer-Turbain.
Fine. One paper is simply not going to give you the answer you're looking for. It just doesn't work that way. So an emphasis, it seems to me, here should be the target physics, and you should be using whatever drivers you have to investigate that at the moment. Again, I don't think we're going to build an HIF machine in the next decade. Okay, I could be wrong, but I think there's a lot of unknowns with when the ions hit the target. What happens after that is still a big integrated science mystery.
More comments, questions? Okay. Peter?
I agree with the last comment that there's still a lot of mystery in ion beam target physics interaction. But I assert that the mysteries are greater in the case of direct drive or fast ignition, where the ion is directly interacting with the fuel. It's been argued in the past that there is a connection between the physics being done in radiation drive on NIF and heavy ion fusion and the heavy ion fusion approach that can be leveraged. One can argue about it, but I think it's an arguable point, and it's been made to some degree successfully in the past. I think one of the critical issues still is the focusability of the beam on the target. And in looking at that carefully a few years ago, based on your publication in the last in the HIF symposium in 2012, this is not specifically about the single pass RF driver, but also all approaches that require telescoping. We were unable to make it hang together without making very aggressive assumptions about neutralization and chromatic aberration corrections and other corrections.
I too worry about the neutralization issue. My limited knowledge of what goes on in this part of physics is limited, but it's one that worries me. And so I agree, there is a need for very careful look at how we neutralize and how much neutralization we have to have, because the current is very high right at the target.
Thank you very much, Professor Helsley.